The text being narrated in this presentation, by James Allen, was written in the style of its time, that is to say, in somewhat archaic English, and written by men for men. But, as Allen has himself asserted, the teachings are meant for mankind, not just for men. The material is utterly profound and life-changing, so we have taken the liberty of adapting and updating the English to make it more neutral and accessible to modern generations, male and female alike, without changing the meaning or the intention of the text, and without making any copyright claims regarding our versions of his sublime works. The original versions can be found freely available online in the public domain for those who might prefer to read them in their original form. Thank you. Entering the Kingdom by James Allen. Foreword. In seeking for pleasures here and rewards that come hereafter, men and women have destroyed in their hearts the temple of righteousness and have wandered from the kingdom of heaven. By ceasing to seek for earthly pleasures and heavenly rewards, the temple of righteousness is restored and the kingdom of heaven is found. This truth is for those who are ready to receive it, and this book is also for those whose souls have been prepared for the acceptance of its teaching. James Allen. Chapter 1. The Soul's Great Need. I sought the world, but peace was not there. I courted learning, but truth was not revealed. I sojourned with philosophy, but my heart was sore with vanity. And I cried, where is peace to be found? And where is the hiding place of truth? Filius Lucius. Every human soul is in need. The expression of that need varies with individuals, but there is not one soul that does not feel it to some degree. It's a spiritual and casual need which takes the form, in souls of a particular development, of a deep and inexpressible hunger which the outward things of life, however abundantly they may be possessed, can never satisfy. Yet the majority, imperfect in knowledge and misled by appearances, seek to satisfy this hunger by striving for material possessions, believing that these will satisfy their need and bring them peace. Every soul, consciously or unconsciously, hungers for righteousness, and every soul seeks to satisfy that hunger in its own particular way, and in accordance with its own particular state of knowledge. The hunger is one, and the righteousness is one, but the pathways by which righteousness is sought are many. They who seek consciously are blessed, and will shortly find that final and permanent satisfaction of soul which righteousness alone can give, for they have come into a knowledge of the true path. They who seek unconsciously, although for a time they may bathe in a sea of pleasure, are not blessed, for they are carving out for themselves pathways of suffering over which they must walk with torn and wounded feet, and their hunger will increase, and the soul will cry out for its lost heritage, the eternal heritage of righteousness. Not in any of the three worlds, waking, dream, and sleep, can the soul find lasting satisfaction, apart from the realization of righteousness. With or without a body, it is ceaselessly driven on by the discipline of suffering until, at last, in its extremity, it flies to its only refuge, the refuge of righteousness, and finds that joy, satisfaction, and peace which it had so long and so vainly sought. The great need of the soul, then, is the need of this permanent principle called righteousness, on which it may stand securely and restfully amid the tempest of earthly existence, no more bewildered, and whereon it may build the mansion of a beautiful, peaceful, and perfect life. It is this realization of this principle where the kingdom of heaven, the abiding home of the soul, resides, and which is the source and storehouse of every permanent blessing. Finding it, all is found. Not finding it, all is lost. It is an attitude of mind, a state of consciousness, an ineffable knowledge, in which the struggle for existence ceases, and the soul finds itself at rest in the midst of plenty, where its great need, indeed its every need, is satisfied, without strife and without fear. Blessed are they who earnestly and intelligently seek, for it is impossible that such should seek in vain. Chapter 2. The Competitive Laws and the Law of Love. When I am pure, I will have solved the mystery of life. I will be sure when I am free from hatred, lust, and strife. I am in truth, and truth abides in me. I will be safe and sane and wholly free when I am pure. It has been said that the laws of nature are cruel. It has also been said that they are kind. The one statement is the result of dwelling exclusively upon the fiercely competitive aspect of nature. The other result from viewing only the protective and kindly aspect. In reality, natural laws are neither cruel nor kind. They are absolutely just, are, in fact, the outworking of the indestructible principle of justice itself. The cruelty and consequent suffering, which is so prevalent in nature, is not inherent in the heart and substance of life. It's a passing phase of evolution, a painful experience which will ultimately ripen into the fruit of a more perfect knowledge, a dark night of ignorance and unrest, leading to a glorious morning of joy and peace. When a helpless child is burnt to death, we don't describe cruelty to the working of the natural law by virtue of which the child was consumed. We infer ignorance in the child, or carelessness on the part of its guardians. Even so, we humans and creatures are daily being consumed in the invisible flames of passion, succumbing to the ceaseless interplay of those fiery psychic forces which, in their ignorance, they do not understand, but which they will eventually learn how to control and use for their own protection, and not, as at present, foolishly employ them for their own destruction. To understand, control, and harmoniously adjust the invisible forces of its own soul is the ultimate destiny of every being and creature. Some men and women in the past have accomplished this supreme and exalted purpose. Some, in the present, have also succeeded, and, until this is done, that place of rest wherein one receives all that is necessary for one's well-being and happiness, without striving and with freedom from pain, cannot be entered. In an age like the present, when in all civilized countries the string of life is strained to its highest pitch, when men and women striving with each other in every department of life for the vanities and material possessions of this perishable existence have developed competition to the utmost limit of endurance. In such an age, the most sublime heights of knowledge are measured, the supreme spiritual attainments are achieved. For when the soul is most tired, its need is greatest, and where the need is great, the effort will be great. Also, where the temptations are powerful, the victory will be greater and more enduring. Men and women love the competitive rivalry with their fellows, while it promises and seems to bring them gain and happiness. But when the inevitable reaction comes, and the cold steel of selfish strife which their own hands have forged enters their own hearts, only then, and not until then, do they seek a better way. Blessed are they that mourn, for they have come to the end of strife, and have found the pain and sorrow to which it leads, and unto them only can the door open which leads to the kingdom of peace. In searching for this kingdom, it is necessary to fully understand the nature of that which prevents its realization, namely, the strife of nature, the competitive laws operative in human affairs, and the universal unrest, insecurity, and fear which accompany these factors. For without such an understanding there cannot be a sound comprehension as to what constitutes the true and false in life, and therefore no real spiritual advancement. Before the true can be apprehended and enjoyed, the false must be revealed. Before the real can be perceived as the real, the illusions which distort it must be dispersed, and before the limitless expanse of truth can open before us, the limited experience which is confined to the world of visible and superficial effects must be transcended. Let, therefore, those of you listeners who are thoughtful and earnest, and who are diligently seeking, or are willing to seek, for that basis of thought and conduct which will simplify and harmonize the bewildering complexities and inequities of life, walk with me step by step as I open up the way to the kingdom. First, descending into hell, the world of strife, rivalry, and self-seeking, in order that, having comprehended its intricate ways, we may afterwards ascend into heaven, the world of peace and love. It is the custom in my household, during the hard frosts of winter, to put out food for the birds, and it is a noticeable fact that these creatures, when they are really starving, live together most amicably, huddling together to keep each other warm and refraining from all rivalry. And if they are given a small quantity of food, they'll eat it with comparative freedom from passionate disagreement. But give them a quantity of food that is more than sufficient for all, and, almost immediately, fighting over the coveted supply begins. Occasionally, we would put out a whole loaf of bread, and then the contention of the birds became fierce and prolonged, although there was more than they could possibly eat during several days. Some, having gorged themselves until they could eat no more, would stand upon the loaf and hover around it, pecking fiercely at all newcomers, and trying to stop them from getting any of the food. And, along with this fierce contention, there was noticeably a great fear. With each mouthful of food taken, the birds would look around in nervous terror, apprehensive of losing their food or their lives. In this simple incident, we have an illustration, crude perhaps, but true, of the basis and outworking of the competitive laws in nature and in human affairs. It's not scarcity that produces competition, it is abundance, so that the richer and more luxurious a nation becomes, the keener and fiercer becomes the competition for securing the necessities and luxuries of life. Let famine overtake a nation, and at once compassion and sympathy take the place of competitive strife. And, in the blessedness of giving and receiving, people enjoy a foretaste of that heavenly bliss which the spiritually wise have found, and which we will all ultimately reach. The fact that abundance and not scarcity creates competition should be held constantly in mind by the listener during the repeated use of this audiobook, as it throws a searching light not only on the statements contained herein, but upon every problem relating to social life and human conduct. Moreover, if it is deeply and earnestly meditated upon, and its lessons applied to individual conduct, it will make the way which leads to the kingdom entirely obvious. Let us now search out the cause of this fact, so that the ignorance connected with it may be transcended. Every phenomenon in social and natural life, as in nature, is an effect, and all these effects are embodied by a cause which is not remote and attached, but which is the immediate soul and life activity of the effect itself. As the seed is contained in the flower, and the flower in the seed, so the relation of cause and effect is intimate and inseparable. An effect also is vivified and propagated, not by any life inherent in itself, but by the life and impulse existing in the cause. Looking out upon the world, we behold it as an arena of rivalry in which individuals, communities, and nations are constantly engaged in struggling, striving with each other for superiority and for the largest share of worldly possessions. We see, also, that the weaker fall out defeated, and that the strong, who are equipped to pursue the combat with undiminished ardor, obtain the victory and enter into possession. And along with this struggle we see the suffering which is inevitably connected with it. Men and women, broken down with the weight of their responsibilities, failing in their efforts and losing all, families and communities broken up, and nations subdued and subordinated. We see seas of tears, telling of unspeakable anguish and grief. We see painful partings and early and unnatural deaths. And we know that this life of strife, when stripped of its surface appearances, is largely a life of sorrow. Such acts, briefly described, are the phenomena connected with that aspect of human life which we are now dealing. Such are the effects as we see them, and they have one common cause which is found in the human heart itself. As all the multiform varieties of plant life have one common soil from which to draw their sustenance, and by virtue of which they live and thrive, in the same way, all the varied activities of human life are rooted in and draw their vitality from one common source, the human heart. The cause of all suffering and of all happiness resides not in the outer activities of human life, but in the inner activities of the heart and mind. And every external agency is sustained by the life which it derives from human conduct. The organized life principle in mankind carves for itself outward channels along which it can pour its pent-up energies, making vehicles for itself through which it can manifest its potency and reap its experience. And, as a result, we have our religions and social and political organizations. All the visible manifestations of human life, then, are effects, and as such, although they may possess a reflex action, they can never be causes, but must remain forever what they are, dead effects, galvanized into life by an enduring and profound cause. It is the custom of people to wander about in this world of effects and to mistake its illusions for realities, eternally transposing and readjusting these effects in order to arrive at a solution of human problems, instead of reaching down to the underlying cause which is at once the center of unification and the basis upon which to build a peace-giving solution of human life. The strife in the world, in all its forms, whether it be war, social or political quarreling, sectarian hatred, private disputes or commercial competition, has its origin in one common cause, namely, individual selfishness. And I employ this term selfishness in a far-reaching sense. In it I include all forms of self-love and egotism. I mean by it the desire to pander to and preserve at all costs the personality. This element of selfishness is the life and soul of competition and of the competitive laws. Apart from it, they have no existence. But in the life of every individual in whose heart selfishness in any form is harbored, these laws are brought into play and the individual is subject to them. Innumerable economic systems have failed, and must fail, to exterminate the strife of the world. They are the outcome of the delusion that outward systems of government are the causes of that strife, whereas they are but the visible and transient effects of the inward strife, the channels through which it must necessarily manifest itself. To destroy the channel is and must ever be ineffectual, as the inward energy will immediately make for itself another, and still another, and another. Strife and rivalry cannot stop, and the competitive laws must continue as long as selfishness is approved in the heart. All reforms fail where this element is ignored and unaccounted for. All reforms will succeed where it is recognized, and steps are taken for its removal. Selfishness, then, is the root cause of competition, the foundation on which all competitive systems rest, and the sustaining source of the competitive laws. It will thus be seen that all competitive systems, all the visible activities of the struggle people have with each other, are as the leaves and branches of a tree which covers the whole earth, the root of that tree being individual selfishness, and the ripened fruits of which are pain and sorrow. This tree cannot be destroyed just by chopping off its branches. To do this effectively, the root must be destroyed. To introduce measures in the form of changed external conditions is merely chopping off the branches. And as the cutting away of certain branches of a tree gives added vigor and vitality to those which remain, even so, in the same way, the very means which are taken to lessen the competitive strife, when those means deal entirely with its outward effects, will only add strength and vigor and vitality to the tree whose roots are always being approved and encouraged in the human heart. The most that even legislation can do is to prune the branches, and so prevent the tree from altogether running wild. Great efforts are now being put forward to found a garden city which will be an authentic Eden planted in the midst of orchards, and whose inhabitants will live in comfort and comparative tranquility. And beautiful and praiseworthy are all such efforts when they are prompted by unselfish love. But such a city cannot exist, or cannot long remain the Eden which it aims to be in its outward form, until the majority of its inhabitants have subdued and conquered the inward selfishness. Even one form of selfishness, namely self-indulgence, if fostered by its inhabitants, will completely undermine that city, levelling its orchards to the ground, converting many of its beautiful dwellings into competitive marts and obnoxious centres for the personal gratification of appetite, and some of its buildings into institutions for the maintenance of order, and upon its public spaces will rise jails, asylums, and orphanages, because where the spirit of self-indulgence is, the means for its gratification will be immediately adopted, without considering the good of others or of the community. For selfishness is always blind, and the fruits of that gratification will be rapidly acquired. The building of pleasant houses and the planting of beautiful gardens can never, of itself, constitute a garden city, unless its inhabitants have learned that self-sacrifice is better than self-protection, and have first established in their own hearts the garden city of unselfish love. And when a sufficient number of men and women have done this, the garden city will appear, and it will flourish and prosper, and great will be its peace, because out of the heart are the issues of life. Having found that selfishness is the root cause of all competition and strife, the question naturally arises as to how this cause will be dealt with. For it naturally follows that a cause being destroyed, all its effects cease. A cause being propagated, all its effects, however they may be modified from without, must continue. Anyone who has thought at all deeply upon the problem of life, and has meditated and contemplated sympathetically upon the sufferings of mankind, has seen that selfishness is at the root of all sorrow. In fact, this is one of the truths that is first apprehended by the thoughtful mind, and along with that perception, there has been born within them a longing to formulate some methods by which that selfishness might be overcome. The first impulse of such a person is to endeavour to frame some outward law, or introduce some new social arrangements or regulations which will put a check on the selfishness of others. The second tendency of their mind will be to feel their utter helplessness before the great iron will of selfishness by which they are confronted. Both of these attitudes of mind are the result of an incomplete knowledge of what constitutes selfishness. And this partial knowledge dominates them because, although they have overcome the grosser forms of selfishness in themselves and are so far noble, they are yet selfish in other and more remote and subtle directions. This feeling of helplessness is the prelude to one of two conditions. The person will either give up in despair and again sink themselves into the selfishness of the world, or they will search and meditate until they find another way out of the difficulty, and that way they will find. Looking deeper and ever deeper into the things of life, reflecting, brooding, examining and analyzing, grappling with every difficulty and problem with intensity of thought, and developing day by day a profounder love of truth. By these means their heart will grow and their comprehension will expand, and eventually they will realize that the way to destroy selfishness is not to try and destroy one form of it in other people, but to destroy it utterly, root and branch, in themselves. The perception of this truth constitutes spiritual illumination, and once it is awakened in the mind, the straight and narrow way is revealed, and the gates of the kingdom already loom in the distance. Then do you apply to yourself, not to others, these words. And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thy own eye? How wilt thou say to thy brother, Let me pull out the mote out of thine eye, and behold, a beam is in thine own eye? Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam out of thine own eye, and then thou wilt see clearly to cast out the mote out of thine brother's eye. When you can apply these words to yourself and act upon them, judging yourself mercilessly, but judging no one else, then you will find your way out of the hell of competitive strife. Then you will rise above the laws of competition and render them of non-effect, and will find the higher law of love, subjecting yourself to which every evil thing will flee from you, and the joys and blessings which the selfish vainly seek will constantly wait upon you. And not only this, having lifted yourself, you will also lift the world. By your example, many will see the way, and will walk it, and the powers of darkness will be weaker for having lived. Here you might ask, but will not those who have risen above their selfishness, and therefore above the competitive strife, suffer through the selfishness and competition of those around them? After all the trouble they have taken to purify themselves, will they not suffer at the hands of the impure? No, they will not. The equity of the divine order is perfect and cannot be subverted, so that it is impossible for one who has overcome selfishness to be subject to those laws which are brought into operation by the actions of selfishness. In other words, each individual suffers by virtue of their own selfishness. It is true that the selfish all come under the operation of the competitive laws and suffer collectively, each acting more or less as the instrument by which the suffering of others is brought about, which makes it appear on the surface as though people suffered for the sins of others rather than their own. But the truth is that in a universe the very basis of which is harmony, and which can only be sustained by the perfect adjustment of all its parts, each unit receives its own measure of adjustment, and suffers by and of itself. Each man or woman comes under the laws of their own being, never under those of another. True, they will suffer like another, and even through the instrumentality of another, if they elect to live under the same conditions as that other. But if they choose to desert those conditions, and to live under another and higher set of conditions of which that other is ignorant, they will cease to come under or be affected by the lower laws. Let us now go back to the symbol of the tree and carry the analogy a little further. Just as the leaves and branches are sustained by the roots, so the roots derive their nourishment from the soil, groping blindly in the darkness for the sustenance which the tree demands. In the same way, selfishness, the root of the tree of selfishness and of suffering, derives its nourishment from the dark soil of ignorance. In this it thrives, upon this it stands and flourishes. By ignorance, I mean something vastly different from lack of learning, and the sense in which I use it will be made obvious as I proceed. Selfishness always gropes in the dark. It has no knowledge. By its very nature, it is cut off from the source of enlightenment. It is a blind impulse, knowing nothing, obeying no law, for it knows none, and is therefore forcibly bound to those competitive laws by virtue of which suffering is inflicted in order that harmony may be maintained. We live in a world, a universe, abounding with all good things. So great is the abundance of spiritual, mental, and material blessings that every man and woman on this globe could not only be provided with every necessary good, but could live in the midst of abounding plenty and yet have much to spare. Yet, in spite of this, what a spectacle of ignorance do we behold. We see, on the one hand, millions of men and women chained to a ceaseless slavery, struggling endlessly in order to obtain a poor and scanty meal and a garment to cover their nakedness. And on the other hand, we see thousands who already have more than they need and can well manage, depriving themselves of all the blessings of a true life and the vast opportunities which their possessions place within their reach, in order to accumulate more of those material things for which they have no legitimate use. Surely, men and women have no more wisdom than the beasts which fight over possession of that which is more than they can all consume, and which they could all enjoy in peace. Such a condition of things can only happen in a state of deep and dark ignorance, so dark and dense as to be utterly impenetrable, except to the unselfish eye of wisdom and truth. And in the middle of all this, striving after homes and food and clothing, there works unseen but potent, infallible and exact, the overruling law of justice, dealing out their own quota of merit and demerit to every individual. It is impartial, it bestows no favours, it inflicts no unearned punishments. It knows not wrath nor pardon, utter true. It measures meat, its faultless balance weighs. Times are as naught, tomorrow it will judge, or after many days. The rich and poor alike suffer for their own selfishness, and none escapes. The rich have their particular sufferings as well as the poor. Moreover, the rich are continually losing their riches, and the poor are continually acquiring them. The poor man of today is the rich man of tomorrow, and vice versa. There is no stability, no security in hell, and only brief and occasional periods of rest and relief from suffering in some form or other. Fear, also, follows mankind like a great shadow, for those who obtain and hold by selfish force will always be haunted by a feeling of insecurity, and will continually fear its loss, while the poor person, who is selfishly seeking or coveting material riches, will be harassed by the fear of poverty. And one and all who live in this underworld of strife are overshadowed by one great fear, the fear of death. Surrounded by the darkness of ignorance, and having no knowledge of those eternal and life-sustaining principles out of which all things proceed, people operate under the delusion that the most important and essential things in life are food and clothing, and that their first duty is to go all out to get and secure them, believing that these outward things are the source and cause of all comfort and happiness. It is the blind animal instinct of self-preservation, the preservation of the body and personality, by virtue of which each man and woman opposes themselves to other men and women in order to get a living or secure a competency, believing that if they do not keep an incessant watch on other people and constantly renew the struggle, they will ultimately take the bread out of his or her mouth. It is out of this initial delusion that comes all the train of delusions, with their attendant sufferings. Food and clothing are not the essential things of life, not the causes of happiness. They are non-essentials, effects, and, as such, proceed by a process of natural law from the essentials, the underlying cause. The essential things in life are the enduring elements in character: integrity, faith, righteousness, self-sacrifice, compassion, love, and out of these all good things proceed. Food and clothing and money are dead effects. There is in them no life, no power except for that which we invest with them. They are without vice and virtue, and can neither bless nor harm. Even the body, which men and women believe to be themselves, which they pander to and gratify, and which they long to keep, must very shortly be yielded up to the dust. But the higher elements of character are life itself, and to practice these, to trust them, and to live entirely in them, constitutes the kingdom of heaven. The man or woman who says, "I will first of all earn a competence and secure a good position in life, and will then give my mind to those higher things," does not understand these higher things, does not believe in them to be higher, for if they did, it would not be possible for him or her to neglect them. They believe the material outgrowths of life to be the higher, and therefore they seek them first. They believe money, clothing, and position to be of a vast and essential importance. Righteousness and truth to be at best secondary, because we always sacrifice that which we believe to be lesser for that which we believe to be greater. Immediately after you recognize that righteousness is of more importance than the getting of food and clothing, you stop going after the latter and begin to live for the former. It is here where we come to the dividing line between the two kingdoms, heaven and hell. Once you perceive the beauty and enduring reality of righteousness, your whole attitude of mind towards yourself and others, and the things within and around you, changes. The love of personal existence gradually loses its hold on you. The instinct of self-preservation begins to die, and the practice of self-renunciation takes its place. For the sacrifice of others, or of the happiness of others, for your own good, you substitute the sacrifice of self and of your own happiness for the good of others. And thus, rising above self, you rise above the competitive strife which is the outcome of self, and above the competitive laws which operate only in the region of self and for the regulation of its blind impulses. You are like one who has climbed a mountain, and thereby risen above all the disturbing currents in the valleys below you. The clouds pour down their rain, the thunders roll and the lightnings flash, the fogs obscure, and the hurricanes uproot and destroy. But they cannot reach you on the calm heights where you stand, and where you dwell in continual sunshine and peace. In your life now, the lower laws cease to operate, and you now come under the protection of a higher law, namely the law of love. And in accordance with your faithfulness and obedience to this law, will all that is necessary for your well-being come to you at the time when you need it. The idea of gaining a position in the world cannot enter your mind, and you scarcely ever think about the external necessities of life, such as money and food and clothing. But, subjecting yourself for the good of others, performing all of your duties scrupulously and without thinking of reward, and living day by day in the discipline of righteousness, all other things follow at the right time and in the right order. Just as suffering and strife is inherent and spring from their root cause, selfishness, so blessedness and peace are inherent and spring from their root cause, righteousness. And it is a full and all-embracing blessedness, complete and perfect in every department of life. For that which is morally and spiritually right is physically and materially right. From here you are free, freed from all anxiety, worry, fear, despondency, all those mental disturbances which derive their vitality from the elements of self and selfishness, and you live in constant joy and peace, and this while living in the very heart of the competitive strife of the world. Yet, though walking in the midst of hell, its flames fall back before and around you, so that not one hair on your head can be singed. Though you walk in the midst of lions of selfish force, for you their jaws are closed and their ferocity is subdued. Though on every hand people are falling around you in the fierce battle of life, you fall not. Neither are you dismayed, for no deadly bullet can reach you. No poison shaft can pierce the impenetrable armor of your righteousness. Having lost the little personal self-seeking life of suffering, anxiety, fear, and want, you have found the boundless, glorious, self-perfecting life of joy and peace and plenty. Therefore take no thought, saying, "What will we eat? Or what will we drink? Wherewithal will we be clothed?" For your heavenly Father knoweth you have need of all these things. But seek ye first the kingdom of God, and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. Chapter 3. The Finding of a Principle. Be still, my soul, and know that peace is within. Be steadfast, heart, and know that strength divine belongs to thee. Cease thy turmoil, mind, and thou the everlasting rest will find. How then will you reach the kingdom? By what process will you find the light which alone can disperse your darkness? And in what way can you overcome the inward selfishness which is strong and deeply rooted? You will reach the kingdom by purifying yourself, and you can only do this by pursuing a process of self-examination and self-analysis. The selfishness must be discovered and understood before it can be removed. It is powerless to remove itself, neither will it pass away by itself. Darkness only ceases when light is introduced, so ignorance can only be dispersed by knowledge, selfishness by love. Seeing that in selfishness there is no security, no stability, no peace, the whole process of seeking the kingdom resolves itself into a search for a principle, a divine and permanent principle on which you can stand, secure, free from yourself, that is, free from the personal element and from the tyranny and slavery which that personal self extracts and demands. You must first of all be willing to lose yourself, your self-seeking self, before you can find yourself, your divine self. You must realize that selfishness is not worth clinging to, that it's a master altogether unworthy of your service, and that divine goodness alone is worthy to be enthroned in your heart as the supreme master of your life. This means that you must have faith, for without this equipment there can neither be progress nor achievement. You must believe in the desirability of purity, in the supremacy of righteousness, in the sustaining power of integrity. You must ever hold before you the ideal and perfect goodness, and strive for its achievement with ever-renewed effort and unflagging zeal. This faith must be nurtured and its development encouraged. As a lamp, it must be carefully trimmed and fed and kept burning in the heart, for without its radiating flame, no way will be seen in the darkness. You will find no pathway out of self. And as this flame increases and burns with a steadier light, energy, resolution, and self-reliance will come to your aid, and with each step your progress will be accelerated until, eventually, the light of knowledge will begin to take the place of the lamp of faith, and the darkness will commence to disappear before its searching splendor. The principles of the divine life will come into your spiritual sight, and as you approach them, their incomparable beauty and majestic symmetry will astonish your vision and gladden your heart with a gladness completely unknown until now. Along this pathway of self-control and self-purification, for such it is, every soul must travel on its way to the kingdom. So narrow is this way, and so overgrown with the weeds of selfishness is its entrance, that it is difficult to find, and, being found, cannot be retained except by daily meditation. Without this, the spiritual energies grow weaker, and you will lose the strength necessary to continue. As the body is sustained and invigorated by material food, so the spirit is strengthened and renewed by its own food, namely meditation upon spiritual things. You then, who earnestly resolves to find the kingdom, will commence to meditate, and to rigidly examine your own heart and mind and life in the light of that supreme perfection which is the goal of your attainment. On your way to that goal, you must pass through 3 gateways of surrender. The first is the surrender of worldly desire. The second is the surrender of opinion. The third is the surrender of self. Entering into meditation, you will commence to examine your desires, tracing them out in your mind and following up their effects in your life and upon your character, and you will quickly perceive that without the renunciation of worldly desire, you remain a slave both to yourself and to your surroundings and circumstances. Having discovered this, the first gate, that of surrender of worldly desire, is entered. Passing through this gate, you adopt a process of self-discipline which is the first step in the purification of the soul. Until now, you have lived as a slavish beast, eating and drinking, sleeping and pursuing enjoyment at the beck and call of your lower impulses, blindly following and gratifying your inclinations without method, not questioning your conduct, and having no fixed center from which to regulate your character and life. Now, however, you begin to live as a human. You curb your inclinations, control your passions, and steady your mind in the practice of virtue. You cease to pursue enjoyment, but follow the dictates of your reason, and regulate your conduct in accordance with the demands of an ideal. With the introduction of this regulating factor in your life, you at once perceive that certain habits must be abandoned. You begin to select your food and to have your meals at stated periods, no longer eating at any time when the sight of food tempts your inclination. You reduce the number of meals per day and also the quantity of food eaten. You no longer go to bed by day or night to indulge in pleasurable indolence, but to give your body the rest it needs, and you therefore regulate your hours of sleep, rising early and never encouraging the animal desire to indulge in dreamy indolence after waking. All those foods and drinks which are particularly associated with gluttony, cruelty, and drunkenness you will dispense with altogether, selecting the mild and refreshing sustenance which nature provides in such rich profusion. These preliminary steps will be adopted at once, and as the path of self-government and self-examination is pursued, a clearer and ever clearer perception of the nature, meaning, and effects of worldly desire will be developed, until it will be seen that the mere regulation of your worldly desires is altogether inadequate and insufficient, and that the desires themselves must be abandoned, must be allowed to fall out of the mind and to have no part of your character and life. It's at this point where the soul of the seeker will enter the dark valley of temptation, for these desires will not die without a struggle, and without many a fierce effort to reassert the power and authority with which they've been invested until now. And here the lamp of faith must be constantly fed and assiduously trimmed, for all the light that it can throw out will be required to guide and encourage the traveller in the dense gloom of this dark valley. At first your desires, like so many wild beasts, will clamour loudly for gratification. Failing in that, they will tempt you to struggle with them, so that they may overthrow you. And this last temptation is greater and more difficult to overcome than the first, for the desires will not be stilled until they are utterly ignored, until they are left unheeded, unconditionally abandoned, and allowed to perish for want of food. In passing through this valley, the searcher will develop certain powers which are necessary to one's further development, and these powers are self-control, self-reliance, fearlessness, and independence of thought. Here also you will have to pass through ridicule and mockery and false accusation, so much so that some of your best friends, indeed even those whom you most unselfishly love, will accuse you of foolishness and inconsistency, and will do all they can to argue you back to the life of animal indulgence, self-seeking, and petty personal rivalry. Nearly everybody around you will suddenly discover that they know your duty better than you know it yourself, and, knowing no other and higher life than their own of mingled excitement and suffering, they will take great pains to win you back to it, imagining in their ignorance that you are losing so much pleasure and happiness and are gaining nothing in return. At first, this attitude of others towards you will arouse you in acute suffering, but you will rapidly discover that this suffering is caused by your own vanity and selfishness, and is the result of your own subtle desire to be appreciated, admired, and well thought of. And immediately this knowledge is arrived at, you will rise into a higher state of consciousness, where these things can no longer reach you and inflict pain. It is here where you will begin to stand firm, and to yield with effect the powers of mind already mentioned. Therefore, press on courageously, heeding neither the criticisms of your friends without, nor the insistent demands of your enemies within, aspiring, searching, striving, looking ever toward your ideal with eyes of holy love. Day by day, ridding your mind of selfish motive, your heart of impure worldly desire, stumbling sometimes falling, but ever travelling onward and rising higher, and, recording the journey of the day each night in the silence of your own heart, don't despair if each day, in spite of all its failures and falls, records some holy battle fought, though lost, some silent victory attempted, though unachieved. The loss of today will add to the gain of tomorrow for you whose mind is set on the conquest of self. Passing along the valley, you will eventually come to the fields of sorrow and loneliness. Your worldly desires have grown weak, having received neither encouragement nor sustenance at your own hands, and are now falling away and dying. You are climbing out of the valley, and the darkness is less dense, but now you realize for the first time you are alone. It is like you are standing upon the lowest level of a great mountain, and it is night. Above you towers the lofty peak beyond which shine the everlasting stars. A short distance below you are the glaring lights of the city which you have left, and from it the noises of its inhabitants are drifting up to you, a confused mingle of shouts, screams, laughter, rumblings of traffic, and the strains of music. You think of your friends, all of whom are in the city, pursuing their own particular pleasures, and here you are, alone upon the mountain. The city is the city of desire and pleasure. The mountain is the mountain of renunciation. And you now know that you have left the world, that from now on its excitements and rivalries are lifeless things for you, and can tempt you no more. Resting a while in this lonely place, you will taste of sorrow and learn its secret. Harshness and hatred will pass from you, your heart will grow soft, and the first faint broodings of that divine compassion, which will afterwards absorb your whole being, will overshadow and inspire you. You will begin to feel with every living thing in its strivings and sufferings, and gradually, as this lesson is learned, your own sorrow and loneliness will be forgotten in your great calm love for others. Here also, you will begin to perceive and understand the workings of those hidden laws which govern the destinies of individuals and nations. Having risen above the lower region of strife and selfishness within yourself, you can now look calmly down upon it in others and in the world, and analyze and comprehend it, and you will see how selfish striving is at the root of all the world's suffering. Your whole attitude towards others and the world now undergoes a complete change, and compassion and love begin to take the place of self-seeking and self-protection in your mind. And as a result of this, the world alters its attitude towards you. At this juncture, you perceive the insanity of competition, and, ceasing from trying to one-up and get the better of others, you begin to encourage them, both with unselfish thoughts and, when necessary, with loving acts and actions. And this you do even to those who selfishly compete with you, no longer defending yourself against them. As a direct result of this, your worldly affairs begin to prosper as never before. Many of your friends who at first mocked you commence to respect and even to love you, and you suddenly wake up to the fact that you are coming in contact with people of a distinctly unworldly and noble type, whose existence you had no knowledge of while living in your lower selfish nature. From many parts and from long distances, these people will come to you to minister to you, and that you may minister to them. Spiritual fellowship and loving brotherhood will become potent in your life, and so you will pass beyond the fields of sorrow and loneliness. The lower competitive laws have now ceased to operate in your life, and their results, which are failure, disaster, exposure, and destitution, can no longer enter into and form part of your experience. And this not merely because you have risen above the lower forms of selfishness in yourself, but because also, in so rising, you have developed certain powers of mind by which you are enabled to direct and govern your affairs with a more powerful and masterly hand. However, you have not yet travelled far, and unless you exercise constant watchfulness, you may fall back into the lower world of darkness and strife at any time, revivifying its empty pleasures and galvanizing its dead desires back to life. And there is a danger especially when you reach the greatest temptation through which mankind is called to pass, the temptation of doubt. Before reaching or even perceiving the second gate, that of surrender of opinion, you will come upon a great soul desert, the desert of doubt. And here for a time you will wander around, and despondency, indecision, uncertainty, and melancholy will surround you like a cloud, hiding from your view the way immediately in front of you. A new and strange fear, too, will possibly overtake you, and you will begin to question the wisdom of the course you are pursuing. Again, the allurements of the world will be presented to you, dressed in their most attractive garb, and the drowning commotion and stimulating excitement of worldly battle will once more assume a desirable aspect. After all, am I right? What gain is there in this? Does not life itself consist of pleasure and excitement and battle? And in giving these up, am I not giving up all? Am I not sacrificing the very substance of life for a meaningless shadow? May it not be that, after all, I am a poor deluded fool, and that all these around me who live the life of the senses and stand upon its solid, sure, and easily procured enjoyments are wiser than I am? Here you'll be tempted and troubled by such dark doubtings and questionings, and these very doubts will drive you to a deeper searching into the intricacies of life, and arouse within you the feeling of necessity for some permanent principle upon which to stand and take refuge. You will, therefore, while wandering about in this dark desert, come into contact with the higher and more subtle delusions of your own mind, the delusions of the intellect, and, by contrasting these with your ideal, will learn to distinguish between the real and the unreal, the shadow and the substance, between the effect and cause, between fleeting appearances and permanent principles. In the desert of doubt, you are confronted with all forms of illusion, not only the illusions of the senses, but also those of abstract thought and religious emotion. It is in the testing of, grappling with, and ultimately destroying these illusions that you develop still higher powers, those of discrimination, spiritual perception, steadfastness of purpose, and calmness of mind, by the exercise of which you are enabled to unerringly distinguish the true from the false, both in the world of thought and that of material appearances. Having acquired these powers, and learning how to use them in your holy warfare as weapons against yourself, you now emerge from the desert of doubt. The mists and mirages of delusion vanish from your pathway, and there looms before you the second gate, the gateway of the surrender of opinion. As you approach this gate, you see before you the whole pathway along which you are traveling, and, for a space, obtain a glimpse of the glorious heights of attainment towards which you are moving. You see the temple of the higher life in all its majesty, and already you feel within yourself the strength and joy and peace of conquest. With Sir Galahad, you can now exclaim, "I saw the Grail, the Holy Grail, and one will crown me king far in the spiritual city," because you know that your ultimate victory is assured. You now enter upon a process of self-conquest which is altogether distinct from that which you've been pursuing until now. Until now, you've been overcoming, transmuting, and simplifying your animal, worldly desires. Now you begin to transmute and simplify your intellect. You have, so far, been adjusting your feelings to your ideals. You now begin to adjust your thoughts to that ideal, which also assumes at this point larger and more beautiful proportions, and for the first time you perceive what really constitutes a permanent and imperishable principle. You see that the righteousness you've been searching for is fixed and invariable, that it cannot be accommodated to mankind, but that mankind must reach up to and obey it, that it consists of an undeviating line of conduct, apart from all considerations of loss or gain, of reward or punishment, that, in reality, it consists in abandoning self, with all the sins of worldly desire, opinion, and self-interests of which that self is composed, and in living the blameless life of perfect love towards all beings and creatures. Such a life is fixed and perfect. It is without turning, change, or qualification, and demands a sinless and perfect conduct. It is, therefore, the direct antithesis of the worldly life of self. Perceiving this, you see that although you have freed yourself from the baser passions and desires which enslave mankind, you are still in bondage to the shackles of opinion. That although you have purified yourself with a purity to which few aspire, and which the world cannot understand, you are still defiled with a defilement that is difficult to wash away. You love your own opinions, and have all along been confusing them with truth, with the principle for which you are seeking. You are not yet free from strife and rivalry, and are still involved in the competitive laws as they occur in the higher realm of thought. You still believe that you, in your opinions, are right, and that others are wrong, and in your egotism have even fallen so low as to bestow a mock pity on those who hold opinions the reverse of your own. But now, realizing this more subtle form of selfishness with which you are enslaved, and perceiving all the train of sufferings which spring from it, having also acquired the priceless possession of spiritual discernment, you reverently bend your head and pass through the second gateway towards your final peace. And now, clothing your soul with the colorless garment of humility, you apply all of your energies to the uprooting of those opinions which you have loved and cherished until now. You now learn to distinguish between truth, which is one and unchangeable, and your own and others' opinions about truth, which are many and changeable. You see that your opinions about goodness, purity, compassion, and love are very distinct from those qualities themselves, and that you must stand upon those divine principles and not upon your opinions. Until now, you may have regarded your own opinions as of great value, and the opinions of others as worthless. But now you stop elevating your own opinions and defending them against those of others, and come to regard them as utterly worthless. As a direct result of this attitude of mind, you take refuge in the practice of pure goodness, unalloyed with base desire and subtle self-love, and take your stand upon the divine principles of purity, wisdom, compassion, and love, incorporating them into your mind and manifesting them in your life. You are now clothed with the righteousness of Christ, which is incomprehensible to the world, and are rapidly becoming divine. You have not only realized the darkness of worldly desire, you have also perceived the vanity of speculative philosophy, and so rid your mind of all those metaphysical subtleties which have no relation to practical holiness, and which until now restricted your progress and prevented you from seeing the enduring realities in life. And now you cast from yourself, one after another, your opinions and speculations, and commence to live the life of perfect love towards all beings. With each opinion overcome and abandoned as a burden, there is an increased lightness of spirit, and you now begin to realize the meaning of being free. The divine flowers of gladness, joy, and peace spring up spontaneously in your heart, and your life becomes a blissful song. And as the melody in your heart expands and grows more and more perfect, your outward life harmonizes itself with the inward music. All the effort you put out now being free from rivalry, you obtain all that is necessary for your well-being without pain, anxiety, or fear. You have almost entirely transcended the competitive laws, and the law of love is now the governing factor in your life, adjusting all your worldly affairs harmoniously and without struggle or difficulty on your part. Indeed, the competitive laws as they occur in the commercial world have long been left behind and have ceased to touch you at any point in your material affairs. Here also, you enter into a wider and more comprehensive consciousness, and viewing the universe and humanity from the higher altitudes of purity and knowledge to which you have ascended, perceive the orderly sequence of law in all human affairs. The pursuit of this path brings about the development of still higher powers of mind, and these powers are divine patience, spiritual equanimity, non-resistance, and prophetic insight. By prophetic insight, I don't mean predicting the future, but direct perception of those hidden causes which operate in human life, and indeed in all life, and out of which spring the multiple and various universal effects and events. Here you rise above the competitive laws as they operate in the thought world, so that their results, which are violence, degeneracy, grief, humiliation, distress, and anxiety in all their forms, no longer occur in your life. As you proceed, the imperishable principles which form the foundation and fabric of the universe loom before you and assume more and more symmetrical proportions. For you there is no more anguish, no evil can come near your abode, and there breaks upon you the dawning of the abiding peace. But you are not free yet. You have not yet finished your journey. You may rest here, as long as you may choose to, but sooner or later you will rouse yourself to the last effort and will reach the final goal of achievement, the selfless state, the divine life. You are not yet free from self, but still cling, though with less tenacity, to the love of personal existence and to the idea of exclusive interest in your personal possessions. And when you at last realize that those selfish elements must also be abandoned, there appears before you the third gate, the gateway of surrender of self. It is no dark portal which you now approach, but one luminous with divine glory, one radiant with radiance with which no earthly splendor can compete, and you advance toward it confidently. The clouds of doubt have long been dispersed, the sounds of voices of temptation are lost in the valley below, and with firm stride, upright carriage, and a heart filled with unspeakable joy, you approach the gate that guards the kingdom of God. You have now given up all but self-interest in those things which are yours by legal right, but you now perceive that you must hold nothing as your own, and as you pause at the gate, you hear the command which cannot be evaded or denied. Yet lackest thou one thing: sell all that thou hast, and distribute unto the poor, and thou wilt have treasures in heaven. And passing through the last great gate, you stand glorious, radiant, free, detached from the tyranny of worldly desire, of opinion, of self, a divine being, harmless, patient, tender, pure. You have found that which you have been searching for, the kingdom of God and his righteousness. The journey to the kingdom may be a long and tedious one, or it may be short and rapid. It may occupy a minute, or it may take 1,000 ages. Everything depends on the faith and belief of the searcher. The majority cannot enter in because of their unbelief. For how can people realize righteousness when they do not believe in it, nor in the possibility of its accomplishment? Neither is it necessary to leave the outer world and one's duties therein. No, it can only be found through the unselfish performance of one's duty. Some there are whose faith is so great that, when this truth is presented to them, they can let all the personal elements drop almost immediately out of their minds and enter into that divine heritage. But all who believe and aspire to achieve will, sooner or later, arrive at victory if, amid all their worldly duties, they faint not, nor lose sight of the ideal goodness, and continue with unshaken resolve to press on to perfection. Chapter 4. At rest in the kingdom, and all things added. The whole journey from the kingdom of strife to the kingdom of love resolves itself into a process which may be summed up in the following words: the regulation and purification of conduct. Such a process must, if assiduously pursued, necessarily lead to perfection. It will also be seen that as you obtain the mastery over certain forces within yourself, you arrive at a knowledge of all the laws which operate in the realm of those forces, and by watching the ceaseless working of cause and effect within yourself until you understand it, You then understand it in its universal adjustments in the body of humanity. Moreover, seeing that all the laws which govern human affairs are the direct outcome of the necessities of the human heart, having reformed and transmuted those necessities, you have brought yourself under the guidance of other laws which operate in accordance with the altered condition, and that, having mastered and overcome the selfish forces within yourself, you can no longer be subject to the laws which exist for their governance. The process is also one of simplification of the mind, a sifting away of all but the essential gold in character. And as the mind is simplified in this way, the apparent unfathomable complexity of the universe assumes simpler and simpler aspects until the whole is seen to resolve itself into and rest upon a few unalterable principles, and these principles are ultimately seen to be contained in one, namely love. The mind thus simplified, you arrive at peace, and now you really begin to live. Looking back on the personal life which you have forever abandoned, you see it as a horrible nightmare out of which you have awakened. But looking out and down with the eyes of the Spirit, you see that others continue to live it. You see men and women struggling, fighting, suffering, and perishing for that which is abundantly given to them by the bountiful hand of the Father, if they would only cease from all covetousness, craving, and clinging, and take it without hurt or hindrance. And compassion fills your heart, and also gladness, because you know that humanity will eventually wake from its long and painful dream. In the early part of the journey, you seemed to be leaving humanity far behind, and you sorrowed in your loneliness. But now, having reached the highest, having attained the goal, you find yourself nearer to humanity than ever before. Indeed, living in its very heart, sympathizing with all its sorrows, rejoicing in all its joys, for, having no longer any personal considerations to defend, you live entirely in the heart of humanity. You no longer live for yourself, you live for others, and so living, you enjoy the highest bliss, the deepest peace. For a time, you searched for compassion, love, bliss, truth, but now you have authentically become compassion, love, bliss, and truth. And it may literally be said of you that you have ceased to be a personality, for all the personal elements have been extinguished, and only those qualities and principles which are entirely impersonal remain. And those qualities are now manifested in your life, and are, from now on, your character. And having ceased from the protection of the self, and living constantly in compassion, wisdom, and love, you come under the protection of the highest law, the law of love, and you understand that law and consciously cooperate with it. Indeed, you are inseparably identified with the law. Foregoing self, the universe grows I, and one whose nature is compassion, wisdom, and love cannot possibly need any protection, for those principles themselves constitute the highest protection, being the real, the divine, the immortal in all men and women, and constituting the indestructible reality in the cosmic order. Neither do you need to seek enjoyment if your very nature is bliss, joy, and peace. As for competing with others, with whom should you compete if you have lovingly identified yourself with all? With whom should you struggle if you have sacrificed yourself for all? Whose blind, misguided, and ineffectual competition should you fear if you have reached the source of all blessedness and receive all necessary things at the hands of the Father? Having lost yourself, your selfish personality, you have found yourself, your divine nature, love. And love and all the effects of love now compose your life. You can now joyfully exclaim, I have made the acquaintance of the Master of Compassion. I have put on the garment of the perfect law. I have entered the realm of the great reality. Wandering is ended, for rest is accomplished. Pain and sorrow have ceased, for peace is entered into. Confusion is dissolved, for unity is made manifest. Error is vanquished, for truth is revealed. The harmonizing principle, righteousness, or divine love being found, all things are seen as they are, and not through the illusory mediums of selfishness and opinion. The universe is one, and all its manifold operations are the manifestation of one law. Until now, in this work, laws have been referred to and also spoken of as higher and lower, and this distinction was necessary. But now the kingdom is reached, we see that all the forces operative in human life are the varied manifestations of the one supreme law of love. It is by virtue of this law that humanity suffers, that, by the intensity of its sufferings, it will become purified and wise, and so relinquish the source of suffering, which is selfishness. The law and foundation of the universe being love, it follows that all self-seeking is opposed to that law, is an effort to overcome or ignore the law, and as a result every self-seeking act and thought is followed by an exact quota of suffering which is required to annul its effect, and so maintain the universal harmony. All suffering is, therefore, the restraint which the law of love puts upon ignorance and selfishness, and out of such painful restraint, wisdom at last emerges. There being no strife, no rivalry, and no selfishness in the kingdom, there is therefore no suffering, no restraint. There is perfect harmony, equipoise, and rest. Those who have entered it do not follow any animal inclinations, they have none to follow, but live in accordance with the highest wisdom. Their nature is love, and they live in love towards all. They are never troubled about making a living. They are life itself, living in the very heart of life, and should any material or other need arise, that need is immediately supplied without any anxiety or struggle on their part. Should they be called to undertake any work, the money and friends needed to carry out that work are immediately forthcoming. Having ceased to violate their principles, all their needs are supplied through legitimate channels. Any money or help required always comes through the instrumentality of good people, who are either living in the kingdom themselves or are working for its accomplishment. Those who live in the kingdom of love have all their needs supplied by the law of love, with all freedom from unrest, just as those who live in the kingdom of self only meet their needs by much strife and suffering. Having altered the root cause in their heart, they have altered all the effects of their inner and outer life. As self is the root cause of all strife and suffering, so love is the root cause of all peace and bliss. Those who are at rest in the kingdom do not look for happiness in any outward possession. They see that all such possessions are mere transient effects that come when they are required and, after their purpose is served, pass away. They never think of these things, money, clothing, food, etc., except as mere accessories and effects of the true life. They are therefore freed from all anxiety and trouble, and resting in love, they are the embodiment of happiness. Standing upon the imperishable principles of purity, compassion, wisdom, and love, they are immortal, and they know they are immortal. They are one with God, the supreme good, and know they are one with God. Seeing the realities of things, they can find no room anywhere for condemnation. All the operations that occur upon the earth they see as instruments of the good law, even those called evil. All men and women are essentially divine, though unaware of their divine nature, and all their acts are efforts, even though many of them are dark and impotent, to realize some higher good. All so-called evil is seen to be rooted in ignorance, even those deeds that are called deliberately wicked, so that condemnation ceases and love and compassion become all in all. But let it not be supposed that the children of the kingdom live in ease and indolence. Those two sins are the first that have to be eradicated when the search for the kingdom is entered upon. They live in a peaceful activity. In fact, only they truly live, For the life of self, with its train of worries, griefs, and fears, is not real life. They perform their duties with the most conscientious diligence, apart from thoughts of self, and employ all their means, as well as powers and faculties, which are greatly intensified, in building up the kingdom of righteousness in the hearts of others and in the world around them. This is their work, first by example, then by precept. Having sold all that they have, renounced all self-interest in their possessions, they now give to the poor, give of their rich store of wisdom, love, and peace to the needy in spirit, the weary and broken-hearted, and follow the Christ whose name is love. And they have sorrow no more, but live in perpetual gladness, for though they see suffering in the world, they also see the final bliss and eternal refuge of love, to which whosoever is ready may come now, and to which all will come eventually. The children of the kingdom are known by their life. They manifest the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, meekness, temperance, self-control. Under all circumstances and conditions, they are entirely free from anger, fear, suspicion, jealousy, caprice, anxiety, and grief. Living in the righteousness of God, they manifest qualities which are the very reverse of those which occur in the world, and which are regarded by the world as foolishness. They demand no rights, they do not defend themselves, do not retaliate, do good to those who attempt to injure them, manifest the same gentle spirit towards those who oppose and attack them as towards those who agree with them. Do not pass judgment on others, condemn no person and no system, and live at peace with all. The kingdom of heaven is perfect trust, perfect knowledge, perfect peace. All is music, sweetness, and tranquility. No irritations, no bad tempers, no harsh words, no suspicions, no lust, no disturbing element can enter there. Its children live in perfect sweetness, forgiving and forgiven, ministering to others with kindly thoughts and words and deeds. And that kingdom is in the heart of every man and woman. It is their rightful heritage, their own kingdom, theirs to enter now. But no sin can enter therein, no self-born thought or deed can pass its golden gates. No impure desire can defile its radiant robes. All may enter it who will, but all must pay the price, and that is the unconditional abandonment of self. If thou wilt be perfect, sell all thou hast. But at these words the world turns away, sorrowful, for it is very rich, rich in money which it cannot keep, rich in fears which it cannot let go of, rich in selfish loves to which it greedily clings, rich in grievous partings which it would gladly escape, rich in seeking enjoyment, rich in pain and sorrow, rich in strife, rivalry, and suffering, rich in excitement and woe, rich in all the things which are not riches, but poor in riches themselves which are not to be found outside the kingdom, rich in all things that pertain to darkness and death, but poor in those things which are light and life. You then, who would realize the kingdom, pay the price and enter. If you have a great and holy faith, you can do it now and stand free, letting the self fall from you like a garment you've been clinging to. If you have less faith, you must rise above self more slowly and find the kingdom by daily effort and patient work. The temple of righteousness is built, and its 4 walls are the 4 principles: purity, wisdom, compassion, and love. Peace is its roof, its floor is steadfastness, its entrance door is selfless duty, its atmosphere is inspiration, and its music is the joy of the perfect. It cannot be shaken, and, being eternal and indestructible, there is no more need to seek protection in taking thought for the things of tomorrow. And the kingdom of heaven being established in the heart, the obtaining of the material necessities of life is no more considered, because, having found the highest, All these things are added as effect to cause. The struggle for existence has ended, and the spiritual, mental, and material needs are daily supplied from the universal abundance.